Hello, I'm Jonathan and I look after the guns here at the Royal Armouries Museum. We have a selection on the table here to show you, and this is a TV-based short video that we're doing about the show Peaky Blinders, British-made historical drama that hopefully, if you're watching this, you're already watching. I'm a big fan of it, increasingly actually, and so I thought I would see what we have in the collection that's similar to what's used in the show and talk you through some of the thoughts I've had watching the show and give you an idea of the sort of historical weapons that were used by criminal gangs and others in the UK. The obvious criminal weapon, I suppose, throughout history has been the pistol or the handgun if you're in the States. We've got a selection here of revolvers. The revolver was still a dominant type at the time, but we're coming to an example of the self-loading pistol. So probably, if you had to pick one iconic firearm from this particular TV show, it would probably be the Webley Mark VI service revolver. And this speaks to the origin of the show, of the main character, Tommy Shelby, and various others, as ex-soldiers. As engineers, miners, or soldiers that are doing that work, you might be armed with a sidearm of this nature. Typically this was an officer's weapon, also issued to people like vehicle crews, artillerymen, things like that, people who did not need a rifle as their primary weapon. Lots and lots of these came back with servicemen. Officers purchased their own, but they were also available on issue. We get more offers of donation of these than probably anything else, or historically we certainly have. As time goes on, there will be less, there will be fewer of them, but they are still out there in huge numbers. Considering only about 400,000 of these were made, we see them quite frequently. It's a standard British military weapon, so of course you find lots of them in Britain. This is a .455 caliber weapon, so similar diameter to the American 45 ACP, but it's a revolver cartridge. It's got a rim on it. You load it quite simply, either singly or with a speed loader. We don't see that in the show. In fact, we very rarely see loading in film and TV, unless it's done for effect. 6 rounds, as we'd expect from a revolver. We close it up, and we can begin firing on a double action, or as we often see on TV, cock it for what's called single action. In other words, the trigger is performing the single action of firing the gun, not revolving the cylinder and firing the gun, which is what happens if you pull through on the trigger. Anyway, single action, double action. Some other YouTube videos about that if you want to know more. This one I've chosen specifically as a late example. So the show starts in 1919 and we're up to, I think, 1926 now, if you're keeping up with your season 4. This one's dated 1924. It says Mark VI because it's the Mark VI Webley. And this one's made at Enfield. Production did happen at Enfield, it's not too widely known. And the Royal Crown appears in there as well. So it's a slightly different one. Typical British proof marks on it apart from that. So this is Tommy's weapon of choice for a long time anyway. Other characters make extensive use of it as well. It's the sort of go-to handgun of the series. The other major Webley in the show is the Mark IV. We see this in the hands of various characters as well. And it's, as the Mark IV name would suggest, it's the earlier version. It has what's called the bird's head grip, which is not as ergonomic perhaps, but that's subjective. And typically a shorter barrel, although Mark IV frames were fitted with a long barrel as well, if you want to get nerdy about it, which we do. Otherwise exactly the same, functions in exactly the same way. It's just a little bit more concealable under your overcoat or whatever you happen to be wearing. This one, unlike the Mark VI example we have, this Webley Mark IV has got some additional markings on it. So 2 arrows facing each other. Hopefully you can see that there, and also up here. So whereas this This, perhaps, could have been brought home by a soldier. This one has been officially sold out of military service. That's what this mark means. So the single arrow means it belongs to the government, the double opposing arrows mean they've sold it. This was at a time when firearms were sold routinely from military service, and anyone potentially could buy them. So this is one that you might have bought after you'd come back, if that makes sense, even though they're very similar things. And you'll find these marks on what Mark 6 Webleys as well. So just an interesting detail as to how a character like this might get a gun. See, they were much more available in the UK then than they are now, from various different channels. But this one could have been bought directly from the government, or from an authorised seller. So both of those are in use. There are also, there's something called the Webley Bulldog, which is a generic type, but also a specific Webley model, the Webley number 2 Bulldog. There's some suggestion that Polly, Tommy's aunt, Helen McCrory's character, has one of these. I'm not entirely sure of that. I'd have to go back and freeze frame it, but I've chosen a generic Bulldog type revolver, and I've chosen this one because it was actually made in Birmingham, and that would not be uncommon. Birmingham was a manufacturing centre for firearms, not even second, it was parallel to London, depending on the period, for gun manufacture. So perfectly plausible that the character in the show would be carrying a Birmingham-made revolver, not a London-made original Webley. So this one is, I'm going to have to read this, we'll look at this in close-up as well. Lincoln Jeffries, gun, rifle and revolver manufacturer, 121 Steelhouse Lane, Birmingham. So a nice little bit of social history in steel there. Amazing how much writing you can fit on a tiny little pocket revolver. So this one, like the one unlike the one in the show, because I think the one in the show is a larger caliber, probably a 450, something like that. This is a 320 or 32 in American. Fixed cylinder, so you open up the loading gate, put it on the safety notch and rotate to each loading position, load it that way. And realistically, actual criminal gunfights, when they did happen, you're not reloading probably at all. You're firing the contents of your weapon and either running away or getting shot. It's extremely unusual that any reloading takes place, even today, in gunfights in the street, when they happen. And perhaps you might carry more than one gun to fire more shots, but it's very rare to see any reloading. And that's partly because it's so fiddly to accomplish with these relatively primitive handguns. We've got yet another Webley here, the RIC, or a version of it at least. So this is the Webley's nomenclature at this time was number 1 for the RIC, number 2 for the Bulldog. So this is like the big brother of the Bulldog revolver. Full caliber, full bore. This is just a particularly nice, very high quality blue finish on this one. It's Webley standard, but many examples have worn and aged over the years, as you might imagine. These are all, this is older, I should say. The Mark 6 Webley, 1915 this was introduced. It was the sort of the ultimate version of the Victorian series of Webleys, and this is one of those Victorian guns, 1880s. The unfluted cylinder is typically an earlier feature, as is their oval or ovoid barrel profile as well. And again, the simpler loading system, more complicated loading system with a loading gate. And you roll the cylinder from there. This one's full of grease, so it's a bit stiff. And this actually has an ejector rod. So you pivot that out into alignment with the case you wish to eject, and you push it out. So you can imagine that would take some time. The Italians have probably shot you by the time you've reloaded, in the context of this piece of fiction that we're talking about. So put that down. Those are nearly all of the revolvers. I have also pulled out a version of what we see the character Grace using in the first series, which is this Harrington and Richardson another type of revolver, and I've gone with that not only because this is Grace's sort of secret agent role, so it's a different, the other side essentially to the criminals who are using these other revolvers, but also because it's a top break design with a different latch than the Webley. So it works in a similar way, but it doesn't have the side latch. It's a bit more fiddly. But once again, if you have to draw this from a handbag or a vest pocket or something, chances are you're going to fire what's in it, which is in this case 5 rounds of 32 Smith & Wesson. And this is also a double action or double action single action mechanism, but much smaller. And you'll find historically most pistols, most handguns that were used in self-defense or by criminals or both. You don't have to be a legal owner to engage in self-defense. Were of this sort of size and power because they are so concealable. This will just sit under a jacket, you won't know it's there. Something like the rather sort of macho Webley, good luck hiding that anywhere. That's huge. You do need a big overcoat to conceal that. And the Mark VI here has come to us with this leather flap holster. We usually see in Peaky Blinders it's a sort of shoulder holster of some sort. They did exist at that period. For the military role, it was always a leather flap holster on the belt.